Hello and welcome to the 905er. I am Joel McLeod.
And I'm Roland Tanner.
When we created this podcast, Roland and I recognized that the 905 region is becoming more than just a suburb of Toronto. In recent history, the region has become far more diversified and more prosperous. Every election cycle, it appears that our little part of the country is crucial to the provincial and federal election outcomes, and the issues that we are facing are starting to drive the national dialogue. As people of Toronto and other parts of the world have decided to make this part of Canada their home, they've changed the face of it into what is yet to be determined. However, two people have at least attempted to quantify that change. Audra Williams and her partner, Haritha Nanaratna, have created a website named 90minutesfrom.com, a website that quantifies and categorizes the communities predominantly in the 905 on unique factors. Factors such as Black Lives Matter support, LGBTQ and Pride organizations, Indigenous issues awareness, voting patterns, and a host of other categories not usually covered by your standard real estate search. This week, we invited them on the podcast to chat with us about their project, how it started, where they hope to see it blossom into, as well as the changing landscape of the 905 region, as development, gentrification, and demographics all seem to be coming together at the same time to transform the region into one of the most influential and important parts of the country. As well as stay tuned for after the interview, as Roland and I will take a deeper look into this. But in the meantime, have a listen. Today, we are joined by Audra Williams and Haritha Nanaratna, who are the authors of the website 90 Minutes from TO. Is that correct?
90minutesfrom.com/Toronto or 90minutesfromtoronto.com.
Okay, but there you go. And it is a very innovative website that, you know what, I'm going to leave it to you guys to describe it for our listeners.
Sure. Well, it is definitely like a pandemic project. It's been really great having this time to hunker down and pull it together. Basically, the inspiration is that, like, you know, a lot of the things, like a lot of our friends feel like their time in Toronto is just not really sustainable. Like Bill 184 is going to make evictions a lot easier. And right now, like the city's definition of affordable housing is at or below market value. And so if market value, you know, and like if wages are not indexed to inflation, then market value is kind of a meaningless barometer of what's affordable. And so, you know, some of my friends kind of like have places that, you know, they've kind of like, we all pass these leases around to make sure nothing goes on the market so it stays affordable, but like legit affordable, you know. But if people who are getting pushed out, you know, evictions are going to start again soon, and they really feel like there's just nowhere, like they can't afford to stay in the city, you know. And a lot of their jobs are also disappearing, like a lot of service industry jobs or retail jobs, like those places a lot of places are closing forever. And then folks like us who do work largely remotely, are kind of looking around and saying like, okay, well, if the reason that we're here is like the friends that we love and the places that we go and our friends are leaving and those places are closed, like, you know, it's worth examining why stay.
So, yeah, you touched on a lot of points there in terms of like the changing demographics and just changing attitudes towards livability in the region. And I'm going to start off by asking, like, we live in the 905. Roland and I live in Burlington. You're in Toronto. And over the last, I'd say, probably about 10 years, we've seen a kind of a steady exodus of Torontonians leaving Toronto to come out to the 905. And I was, as a Torontonian, like, what is the perception of the 905 that appeals to you? Why is this such a destination? Is it just strictly financial purposes, or is there something else to it?
Yeah, I realized I didn't actually explain what the website is. I just talked about our own situation. Sure. So the website is basically like our cataloging of as much information as possible of like towns and cities that we could conceivably move to and still be within like either a reasonable driving distance of Toronto, because we know that we do have some friends who will stay, you know, and I presently am a writer 4 days a week at the Center for Social Innovation, and Haritha is building a non-alcoholic cocktail company, and know we're going to have customers here. Like, like being in Nova Scotia, like part of the impulse is like, let's just like buy a big house by the ocean and forget all of it. But that's challenging. Right. And so we collected as much data as possible, and we've made that data public basically. And so we've tracked like everything from like BIPOC population, like average house prices, median age, rainfall, culture, arts, and then like the most important things, like, is there Black Lives Matter support? Like, have there been a disproportionate amount of hate crimes? What does Pride celebration look like? Are there queer positive churches? And so people can come to the site and they can kind of like on this interactive map, like move the sliders and click the radio buttons and put in their ideal situation. And then like the cities and towns that are still like on the map will meet those criteria. There's also a sortable spreadsheet that's sortable and searchable with the same data. And then there are some house listings because it's sort of fun to see what's out there. And then I've tried to write like a sort of little profile pulling that data, but just having it in a more accessible way for people who take in information that way about like presently 55, but I know I'm going to increase cities and towns that are in the area. So people can kind of quickly go to a page and be like, okay, like there is transit from Toronto, BIPOC population is like over 20%, house prices this, and then, oh, there's 2 comic stores, or like, oh, there's this like neat theater thing that's happening. And, the mayor was positive about Black Lives Matter, or et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, so it's trying to just like be a clearinghouse of information for other folks who feel like they either want to leave or have to leave, so that people are making that decision like right. based on being like, having that data and being informed versus like, oh, I went here for a weekend, it seemed nice.
When Torontonians leave the city of Toronto to move out to the 905, is it they're looking for something, or is it more of a necessity?
I think it's I think it's either. Like someone I work with moved to Burlington in December, and she just like wanted to have like outdoor space, and and I think that I think some people make the choice because they want to, and I think others maybe feel like it's just not sustainable here. But like again, like I guess with the site, hopefully people are like very intentionally like choosing a place they would like to go versus like, oh, I'm just going to be miserable and shoved out of where I wish I could be.
I guess it could end up being kind of a fuzzy line depending on the person, because you might decide that like having a nice big yard or a detached garage or what have you is like integral to your housing experience, and
right.
looking for that in Toronto is going to be like next to impossible at a reasonable price. So I guess depending on how you look at it, it could be considered looking for something specific in Burlington, or a place like Burlington or the 905, like being forced to leave the city entirely because you can't find it.
So you guys at the moment, obviously, judging from the website, probably that you're looking for like a single family home, something like that. You're not looking for a condo.
No, yeah, and we're not looking yet. Like, to be clear, like this is sort of like us starting our fact finding mission, and like, we do love our apartment in Toronto, and we would love to. We definitely have joked about dying of old age here, but we also know that like it's not entirely in our control. Like just today, like someone came to the door and was like, "We're looking at houses to buy in your neighborhood," and our landlord's a great person, and I don't feel like he'd just shove us out. But it could be that like maybe he gets like a really good offer, maybe his family has to move. Like we just don't have complete control over where we live, right. And so so we have been trying to think of like where is a place that we could feel like we had a home that felt like it was stable, and also like met our needs.
Where you're not losing too many of the things that you like about Toronto, and you're maybe gaining some affordability and things like that.
Definitely.
I thought I was looking on your website before the interview here, and you wrote one thing that you wrote stuck out to me is that you wrote on the website, "We don't own where we live, and we can't afford to own anything else in this city either," referencing Toronto. And that seems to be kind of a mantra of a lot of young Torontonians, like young 20-somethings trying to make it on their own. I'm just wondering, is being able to own the place that you live something like, is it akin to owning a piece of the community that you live in? And if that is the case, does it change the dynamic of how you live in your community?
I don't think so. Like we live on a street called Cowan in Parkdale. There's a Facebook group literally for our street alone. There's like a street sale that happens every year. And it's definitely a mix of like people who own and people who rent, but there doesn't seem to be any like separation, like in the Facebook group or like in the community. Like I don't feel less invested because I rent. I think I just feel a little bit more precarious.
Well, I guess that's the case. Is how many Torontonians are feeling on this precarious? Like you said, you're pretty confident in that your landlord won't sell the property that you live in. But I know that there must be a number of other Torontonians who don't feel as secure as you folks do. And I'm wondering, is that, how tied do you feel to a community that if you might be evicted in a month's time because a deal comes along?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a concern. Like, I don't know that it makes you, like, I guess it depends. Like, there's lots of definitions of community, right? So I feel like, my friends aren't less invested in the Toronto queer community because they might get evicted, but they might be less invested in like their street or whatever. And I think like the first 6 years I lived in Toronto, I did have to move 5 times because like someone's kid came back from university, someone else got divorced, there's a hot water pipe burst. And it did make it kind of hard to feel like I could like really trust in where I was geographically. But during those 6 years, like I still have like, a good chosen family and, have been like active in different like political things or
right
artistic things or whatever. So I don't feel like we're all just like biding our time, but I feel like it's just like being able to kind of exhale. Like I think that it's like, so many of my friends, I'll be talking to them, they're like, oh, my landlord's here. Like, what if he's selling? Maybe he's just like mowing the lawn. But like there's that like that feeling of it kind of always looming over us. And the house behind us is for sale for $2.7 million. And so like house prices can drop dramatically, and
right.
Maybe that's going to, but it's not. It's still like outside of our reality.
Well, on something you mentioned there about the network that you're in, wondering if the landlord's coming in. I was considering that there used to be an assumption that you'd live in Toronto, say for your 20s, you'd work, live in Toronto, but by the time you hit your 30s, you think about marrying, settling down, starting a family, and the idea is that you move out to the suburbs for the white picket fence. And
I don't know a single person like that.
Well, that's just what I was going to ask. Do you think that's an outdated notion? Is it a fantasy that people are trying to sell us that isn't true to the reality of life in the 21st century?
Yeah, I'm not sure who's trying to sell that. Like, I just don't know anybody who wants everyone I know like wishes they could like wants to raise their kids in the city. They want to raise their kids somewhere diverse, or they're like have no interest in getting married. Like I said, like I'm 44. Like I don't feel like I'm outgrowing the city. Like I spent my 20s in a town of 500 people. Like I very intentionally came back here. So I'm sure that there are the people who have like gender reveal parties or whatever. It's like a different species. But like I don't know anybody who's like who has that like conveyor belt narrative in their mind. I think it's just, yeah. And I don't know who's trying to sell it. Like I'm just maybe outside that world, but
I was going to ask, obviously I'm going to make what I think is a pretty confident guess that not having to rely on a car is going to be important to you. And that's probably traditionally been a weakness of the 905 is that kind of car dependency.
We actually have a car. Haritha, was working, you can tell it.
Oh yeah. Like I worked in Toronto's hospitality scene for about a decade, and it's kind of tied into what I love so much about the project is that I was commuting at odd hours, and commutes one way would be anywhere between 1 to 2 hours.
He was commuting from like West End to like North York on like the 4 o'clock in the morning.
So
bus.
in a sane world, that would be like half an hour at the most.
So he had finally like gotten his license and gotten a car, and then the week later the bar he worked in closed.
Yeah.
But we are in a unique position where like we do have a car, which is also helping us like make these road trips to these different places and try to get a sense of them. And one of the things that Haritha has said on those trips is that like like he didn't know a lot of these places existed, right?
Yeah, if I had known, I would have probably planned to move out of the city, much earlier. But like the data, it's not out there, and they aren't heavily marketed. I feel like to young people in Toronto. So working as a young person in Toronto, like in your like 20s or 30s, even I'd say. Like you're very just locked into like, I'm just going to grind here until I magically accumulate enough money to put a down payment on a house here. And then we'll see.
Yeah. And Rita said that like, if he'd known, like, he's like, I could have just like maybe bought a cheaper house like outside of the city, but still commuted back into the Toronto to work. Like he didn't have a desire, like he liked like the hospitality industry he was working in, but he was like commuting 2 hours each way, just to rent. And so, but anyway, we are unusual in that we do have a car.
But like you say, that is
Absolutely.
unusual these days, and that most people in Toronto live without them, and which is, I think, is fantastic. Yeah. And looking forward to the day when we can maybe get a bit closer to that. Now, obviously, on very important to you is the issue of race, and you've specifically included things like Black Lives Matter marches and things like that. Is that kind of a concern that you have that coming to the 905, you're more likely to encounter issues of race or not non-acceptance? Is that?
I don't have that perception. I think that some people do. Like Ajax is 905, and it has the highest Black community, the biggest Black community anywhere outside of, I think, maybe like North Preston in Nova Scotia. I think people know that it's diverse. I think that it's just a matter of like, if you're choosing, even if you're like choosing between 5 or 6 places, or even just kind of like having it spelled out for you. Like, I think that, I think if people have been to like Burlington or Brampton or Markham, like they've probably seen that it's diverse, but I think that they might not know like how it is politically or like, what it's like to be queer there. But I definitely, like, I don't, again, like, I guess maybe because I've moved around so much, like, I don't get a sense that people feel like outside of Toronto, everyone's racist. I think it's just a question of like, you want to like give people as much information as possible, and like, I had this talk with a friend of mine who is queer, and she was saying that like, she would have a hard time leaving the queer community in Toronto. But at the same time, we cannot ignore the fact that the Toronto police let a serial killer kill gay men for 15 years in Toronto. So there's no like, I don't think any of us have an illusion that like Toronto is like, has less like systemic injustice or whatever. There's just like, at some point you get a critical mass of people and at least you can have a community. So I think it's more like, is there already like an anti-racist like community activist group that I could be part of if I go there, but then there are places where like, I think it was, I shouldn't say because I don't want to get it wrong, but one of the towns, like the police apologized for tearing down Black Lives Matter signs, and that was like in one of the like more, I think it was like in Peel. And so, I think that having that stuff on your radar is also good. But I definitely don't want to be part of like this narrative that like Toronto is this like open-minded like utopia and everywhere else is like this horrible, closed-minded backwater. I just feel like if people can get all this information at once, like hopefully they will also see that reality that's not the case.
Does it go to the sense that maybe you're trying to tear down walls of perception with this? Because I know we spoke a bit off air in generalities, but I've lived in Burlington for the majority of my life, and I can remember I've witnessed firsthand kind of the demographic changes that have happened here in the 905 as more people move here from other parts of the world, but as well as people leaving Toronto, kind of on this mass exodus, pretty much in the last 10 years, I would say, that have come out this way. And I'm wondering, this is a trend that I don't see stopping anytime soon. Would you agree that that's been the case, that over time we've been seeing just a steady more cosmopolitanization, if that's even a word, of the 905?
I think probably. I went to an arts event as part of Sikh Heritage Month in Brampton a few years ago to see a poetry reading by Rupi Kaur, and like there's like an amazing art scene there. Like there's this whole kind of like, especially like this Punjabi community that's like generating a ton of like amazing like hip hop and paintings and theater, and and I definitely I don't think I was aware of maybe just, I think in that case, like how city supported it was. Like there's this big like Rose Theater, and then like if you go to their website, they have like actually like their 6-point plan to encourage like culture making and stuff in Brampton. And so I think that things like that can be really helpful, like to be able to kind of make that public. And I think if you are like, a young playwright and you realize that like you don't have to give up the arts to leave the city.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that, because as what we've kind of been talking about, Roland and I, over the last few months, is that just how the 905 is in the process of change. And I think, is there an opportunity here perhaps that as the 905 region starts to grow and we start to build, develop, and kind of change the the nature of it, that maybe we learned some of the mistakes that Toronto has made in terms of how to foster culture, foster entrepreneurship and that kind of thing, and have people of various backgrounds just be able to move out to this part to set up home.
Yeah, I mean, like, a government learning from another government's mistakes is a beautiful dream. And so I think that like it could be the case. And if we do see, like, I think maybe people are more likely to learn from someone else's successes. So like if Brampton really nails this plan, or if there's like another city that like has an incredible library program, like you can kind of get like the evangelists to be like, I saw this amazing thing, like this seems to be working, like let's reproduce that here. Yeah, I mean, that would be incredible. One thing that like is interesting in all of this research is that like, and because the most diverse places are the closest to Toronto, which makes sense, of course, geographically. The most diverse places are also the most expensive places. And so a lot of, ourselves and other friends, like we're really having to try to balance like, affordability and community. And that's like, it's just interesting because I know that people like, if you look at like, we've spent a lot of time in Detroit, and there are a lot of like white New York artists moving to Detroit, and that's like a whole conversation, but they're like kind of like middle-class white folks like moving into like, a majority like Black community, which has a certain impact. But here it's like the places that are the most affordable are actually also the whitest, which is just because of geography, not because of anything else. And so, like I think that that's part of like how hopefully this like can be useful, because like that way, at least if you can set your limits, like, okay, it's got to be like at least 20% BIPOC, and then you can start from there. And that way you're not kind of like all over the place. And so, I think that, a lot of like, I think the reality, like, I hope it isn't, but that like some of our friends, I don't even know if they could afford to live in like the 905, like it's like some of us think we're going to have to go further afield. Like Haritha and I are looking largely in Niagara because Niagara's pretty diverse. Like the NDP does okay there. There's a waterfront, which I like, and there are lots of mid-century modern bungalows that have had the same owner for 60 years. But also it's just like, we couldn't afford to buy a house in Markham either. We couldn't afford to buy a house in Brampton. So yeah, it's an interesting choice people are having to make between affordability and community.
Yeah, and the whole affordability, I mean, yeah, I was going to say, I hate to break it to you, but you've probably learned this already, but certainly, I mean, Burlington, Oakville, these are not very affordable places. And Hamilton's not as affordable as it once was. So it's a struggle, and it's an issue that we are dealing with a lot, because there's a need for more housing, but the housing that tends to get built is they call affordable $700,000. It's like, what kind of affordable is that? So it's almost like the challenges of Toronto are coming out of the city and affecting the rest of us.
I guess my hope would be that people could use, like when I posted like on my own personal Facebook page, like the profile I did about Brampton, and like a ton of people were just like, oh my God, like I just thought Brampton was a bedroom community of Toronto. And I'm just like, well, like people certainly treat it that way, I'm sure. But like, you could definitely be like, a playwright and a hip hop artist and just stay in Brampton. Like you don't and I guess, I want people to live where they live,
Well, that's the kind of the point of this podcast is that we're the 905 is home to, what do we say, 4 million people. That's a sizable population in the entire country. And this is like the 905 is pretty much the golden horseshoe of the country. To kind of just write it off as just a suburb of Toronto, I think it does it a bit of a disservice, because as we're talking about today, we're having a slow but poignant demographic change as people are, just different communities are moving in and setting up shop and starting businesses and setting down roots. We're turning into a bit more of a landmark in the country.
Well, it's definitely not monolithic anymore, even if it ever was. I mean, so you say you mentioned Brampton, obviously. Markham has a majority Chinese population, I think. So there's huge variety across the region. But actually, people who live, I don't think the average person who lives in Burlington doesn't know much about Brampton, doesn't know about much about Markham, doesn't know much about... And that's another thing that we're hoping to counter, is that kind of, Because if you ask someone, what do you think about Markham, who lives in Burlington, they're probably going to go, well, it's kind of boring, isn't it? But they know nothing about it. Like no one's ever seen a Markham newspaper, or no one knows the Markham art scene. So it's definitely, and the region is projected to grow by something like 1.5 million, 2 million people over the next sort of 15, 20 years. So it's there's going to be transformation happening, which is certainly it's going to be interesting.
And like you have like some really interesting people getting elected. Like Sarah Singh is super cool, and Matthew Green, and Selena, whose last name I could never say properly because Rosie Barton once called her Selena Cesar Chavez, and that's what I think of every time I say her name now. But like, she's incredible. Anyway, like, and so I think that like that's also something that we look at and we are really interested in. Like, even if it's just the candidates who don't get elected but they're still running, like you still get a sense of like some really cool things. And so like I was thrilled when Sarah Singh won, and not just because she is a New Democrat. And I'm a big fan of Selena as well. Like we're even Facebook friends, which is very exciting. So I really like, it's really, I guess, like shining a light on those like community leaders and movers and shakers is also something that that I guess should be happening more.
I was just going to say, we saw a few years ago that the I guess it was 2014 election that sort of the last election before Mr. Ford arrived, that there was almost like a direct connection between GO train lines and progressive MPPs being elected, and I mean partly that's commuters coming out of Toronto, and the changing kind of the changing face of the population, and certainly Burlington was. I don't know how many times people have told me that you could nominate a blue fire hydrant and they'd elect it, but it's not the case anymore. We have a Liberal MP. We've had a Liberal MPP, and although we have a Conservative MPP at the moment, no one can pretend that it's a safe seat anymore.
Which is good for democracy.
So it's. Yeah, and I really think your website is valuable, not just for Torontonians, but for people who live in the 905, because we often don't know much about
it's
our own
true.
region.
Like maybe it will be called something else in a year. Like I have no idea. Like it was very much like a product of like, Haritha and I taking some road trips and being like, this place is cool. Could we live here? And then like looking up and being like, oh, it's actually 95% white, and maybe we don't want to. And so let's get as much information as possible. So we for sure like. To me, it's less of like Toronto being the center of the universe, which believe me, like I've lived other places, like I totally get that mindset. It's just like I'm just like my present geographic center, and I was looking in 90 minutes as my own radius, and then I just decided to kind of make it all public. But I would love to if the site like maybe didn't even have geographic boundaries, and people like it functioned like a wiki, and people could like put up their own experiences and things like that. Because even in the month that I've had it up, like people have inboxed me to be like, okay, like this messed up thing happened in my town, or like this amazing bookstore just opened up, and like presently, like I just make all those edits, but that's obviously not like a sustainable system. And so, and I've also had people reach out like, would you do one for Vancouver? Would you do one for Ottawa? Would you do one for Montreal? And so, and I agree with you. Like, I wish everybody knew more about what was nearby. And I've had people tell me that they've actually just started using the site as like a travel guide, and that's really cool too. So
it's definitely
it could be that the focus will shift.
It's definitely helpful to kind of, because again, you look at criteria other than just, what's housing affordability. Which is the primary criteria of looking at where to move into the 905. I like that you have the different different demographic makeups and different social networks that are happening in the region, because it's an important part of how our communities are developing and how they are changing. And I just thought it was a very fascinating piece of work.
Well, thank you so much.
I was going to make an offer that if you do want to come out to see Burlington firsthand, let us know. We'll try and we at least give you a guided tour, because we'll try and up our score. We'll try and bias our results a bit.
We should. I can't let myself not mention, just because you focused on this as an issue, the Burlington's Black Lives Matter march had something between 8,000 and 10,000 people.
That's incredible.
It was incredible.
We actually did an episode on it. It's our third episode with the organizers of the march.
That's cool.
For Burlington, it was huge, because Roland and I have been involved in politics at the local level for, I'm going to say, about 10 years now, and we've never seen anything like it. And the fact that they had about 10,000 people marching for Black Lives Matter, It sends a message that there's definitely a demographic change happening in the region, and possibly even a generational one.
Anyway, well, thanks so much for joining us to talk about this. It really is a fascinating project, and like Joel said, if you do make that trip to Burlington, please contact us.
Definitely,
We'll give you a tour.
We'll give you a guided walking tour, 6 feet apart, of course.
Thanks so much again.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Take care. Well, I'd like to thank Audra and Haritha for coming on this week. I thought the discussion was very, very informative and probably could have gone on for another hour or two just on demographics alone. What did you think, Roland?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting, and I was particularly interested to see the criteria that they've used as what matters to them in potential homes that they might be looking for, or that other people in Toronto might be looking for. And it's not, like you said in the introduction, it's not just a matter of house prices. It's so much more than that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's actually goes to the heart of kind of what people are looking for in terms of what makes up a community, which is, like you said, more than just a house price or what your mortgage is going to look like, which in all honesty can honestly be a factor in turning people away from living here. If our housing prices have gone up so drastically in the last 10 years that I think it can definitely be a factor in turning people away from wanting to move here.
Well, for sure. I mean, we were kind of jokingly encouraging them coming to, well, we very much want them to come to Burlington, but we were kind of joking about it as one of the destinations they might choose, probably outside their price range by the sound of it. We're already in that area that, well, Burlington's probably not a city I could afford to live in if I bought a house now,
No.
So that's a worrying development. In terms of the very progressive kind of criteria that they had in place, things like support for Black Lives Matter, LGBT issues, pride. That's interesting, I guess, because the growth coming to our regions will so often come from people who've started off in Toronto, in the traditionally more progressive end of things, and are changing the traditional political face of the 905 as they move out. And I think we saw that not at the last provincial election, but in 2014, where I think I said in the interview, anywhere with a GO station went Liberal or NDP, and it's kind of that. I think this is good for the region, even if you're not a Liberal or an NDP, in that it's just bringing more variety, and that kind of monolithic,
right,
Anglo-Saxon kind of look to the region is becoming a thing of the past.
Well, I definitely agree. I think it's a good thing, just adding more perspectives into the cultural and sociological mix of where we live. I can remember when this used to be just a presumed conservative seat and conservative voting area, and that we've seen as more people of different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different religions have started to settle down here, and honestly, I think really contributed to the makeup of the region. Like, really, really settled in and are becoming leaders and influencers in our communities, all for the better, and just adding a different perspective, different voice, which is a good thing. I think overall it's a good thing for democracy, municipally, provincially, and federally, just to have that kind of a new perspective and new blood, if you will, to kind of just, hey, what if we take a look at it from this angle and say, hey, you know what, that's a good idea. Let's see what happens if we try that idea.
I think that's a really important point, and I think it's a point that our municipalities have not fully got their heads around yet. Something we're going to talk about in a few weeks' time, something that I have some a game I have some skin in. It was to do with looking at changes to advisory committees in Burlington. Advisory committees, I'm sure Burlington is no exception, tend towards the older in age and whiter and more wealthy in ethnic makeup. So those voices that now make up a significant part of every municipality in the 905 are often not invited into the process. Now, some would say, well, if you can't be bothered to get down to City Hall, and I've heard this expressed by people in positions of some influence, if you can't be bothered to come down to City Hall, why the hell should we listen to you? I think that's a fairly appalling that's view of the world.
That is absolutely, you're right, it is appalling, mostly because I think a good chunk of people who are coming out here and settling down, and what we want to attract are younger families. Regardless of what your background is, what religion you are, you want young families to come in, settle down, because those are the ones who will stay here for a while. They will contribute to the tax bracket. They will contribute to, the tax base. And a lot of them are coming in and they're setting up businesses, and not, I want us to get away from the stereotypical immigrant, setting up a restaurant. Like, we're talking high-end professional lawyers, doctors, financial services, the high-end professions they're setting up here and they're servicing here. And I think you're right. There's a bit of an old school mentality of, we're just a commuter hub to go into Toronto. And we live here, but we work in Toronto all the time. And I think that's slowly changing. I do believe that a lot of people want to work closer to Burlington, Hamilton, Milton, Vaughan, Markham, Durham, Oshawa. They want to work closer to home, live closer to home, and have an impact closer to home. The problem is you're working long hours, you're working hard to provide for your family, keep a roof over your head, especially in these times with the pandemic. But you're right. To go back to your point of saying, well, you need to come down to City Hall to make your voice heard, is just an outdated mentality that I think it harms us as a community. That we want those entrepreneurs, we want those young, vibrant, new ideas to sit at the table. And if you're going to erect barriers to get them down to City Hall, you're going to miss out on some great ideas. What you need to do is have City Hall go to them. And in the age of social media, we're doing a podcast right now, but to do stuff like that, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, also there are all sorts of forums that our municipalities should be exploiting to reach out to people and say, listen, we need new ideas, instead of just having the same 5 or 10 people standing up at the microphone because, that's just what we've always done. It's a poor example of democracy. And I think, especially in our municipalities, they're a perfect example to kind of reinvigorate our democracy with new technology, new ideas, and new formats that can help bring in new ideas. And especially when I think we're going to be seeing a lot of transformative change because of the pandemic in the few years to come.
Yeah, I think the pandemic may, and I hope it does, really put some kind of light a fire under the change that needs to happen in how we view where we live and where we work, and that this kind of idea of, it's completely normal and fine to drive 2 or 3 hours a day to work is it's not healthy for anybody. I don't think there's anybody who really enjoys it. You just do it because of house prices, or you do it because your boss wants you to be in the office, or right. and the excuse is less and less allowable, and it would allow people, if you look at who does get involved in municipal affairs, it's often people like myself, self-employed, people who are retired, people who have time, people who don't have children, people who, not having children is the biggest one of all, people who are confident enough in the English language to feel that if they go and delegate at City Hall, they're not going to make a fool of themselves. These are huge barriers to people who are less wealthy, perhaps newer to the country, or have just a busy life with children and, sit on a train twice a day or whatever, you're just not going to get involved if in the current way that we do things.
But it should also be pointed out that those people that you just described, Roland, do not contribute any less to the fabric of our democracy.
Absolutely,
and
absolutely.
It's, I know as a father of 2 young children, it is my top priority. It's my number one priority, and that's where I put my focus on. And so I might miss a city council meeting, but if there was a forum that I could input my thoughts and input my thoughts on a particular topic that I was passionate about, I'd love to take that up. And just to know that my thoughts are being heard, and it's not just sitting in somebody's inbox in City Hall, in a City Hall cubicle somewhere.
And it speaks to that thing that we hear so often about voter apathy, which is usually counted on one metric, which is like how many people turn out to vote once every 4 years. Well, I don't meet anybody in my life who's apathetic about politics or anything, really. They care, they just don't, I have people I know who I know are not voters. They don't vote. And I really wish they did, and I think they should, and all those things. But they're not apathetic. They moan continuously about all the things that are being done that are wrong. Mm-hmm. Now, okay, go and vote. That's your first option. That's the simplest thing to do. However, it's really a failing of our institutions to not find ways to get those people involved in contributing. And I think there's less and less excuse for that. So don't talk about people being apathetic when often they're not remotely apathetic and they're just really bloody busy. Okay, so I guess the other thing we could take a quick look at is just other things in the news this week. I know there's been some developments on the school front. Obviously, children are literally almost going back in the next couple of days, depending where you are and which school you're in. What are your thoughts about the current state of affairs? I mean, have you made a decision yet with regard to your own children? I mean,
we have. My wife and I had a long chat. We were waiting to the 11th hour, mostly because we wanted to get every ounce of information we possibly could before the deadline. We are sending our daughter back to her school. The reason why, and I'm sure it's similar to what some of the families of our listeners are listening. Sorry, some of the decisions that the parents who are listening might mirror is we thought the social aspect was too important. She's been out of school now since March, learning at home and just socializing at home, and I think she just needs that social aspect. We know from talking with other parents, they're in the same situation, but the concern is how safe are they going to be? It didn't help that in recent news, once the boards came out with how many numbers were going to be in the distance learning program and how many were going to be returning to school, in some cases there was 20% distance learning. Like that, those are sizable numbers, 1/5 of the population not returning. The hope was, okay, maybe we'll be able to make this work. If 1/5 of our students are not returning to schools, we might be able to get those reduced numbers in the classrooms to a safe and tolerable number, only to find out that due to the funding arrangements between the provincial government and the various boards in the province, boards are now collapsing class sizes into one another. So rather than maybe having a 20-student classroom, we're now getting upwards of 25 to 30 range, which is a sad fact to see that we can't seem to get our imagination around making this work.
I think the last thing probably most parents would expect, but is absolutely happening, is that reduced class sizes don't result in more spaces for smaller class sizes and more space between children. No, that just means we have to collapse the classes down. So we'll end up with classes which are just potentially bigger than they were before. All because the government won't invest the necessary money to get more teachers in there or whatever. I mean, I think it's a mistake. And then yesterday we had the Minister, Stephen Lecce, saying, after some really quite scary numbers coming out of Quebec with regard to infection levels at something, was it 35 schools or something like that, we're not Quebec, we're wearing masks.
Right.
Sure. Maybe, I'm not saying masks don't count, but there's no one wearing masks in the younger age groups anyway.
Well, in the Halton board and as well as the Catholic boards, they have passed a resolution saying that all students will be wearing face masks while in school. So that's a good thing, in my opinion. But I mean, on that note, Roland, there was reports recently of a teacher in Brampton in the Peel board who contracted COVID-19 while prepping for their class to open, which is not a good omen for the start of the school year. I think we do have a long way to go, and my sense is that a lot of this is going to be made up as we go. Once the doors open, we're going to see how this goes and adjust accordingly. Is the sense that I'm getting from the boards, the teachers, and I'm hoping the government will do the same thing. But right now, I can't be certain.
Yeah, it's felt all along like the government has been trying to look like it's leading while not leading, and the school boards and the teachers having to kind of wing it to a significant extent, and hopefully it all works out well. I mean, and I think, you know, it's not fair that parents have been put in that position of making really difficult decisions. I mean, I think whichever decision any parent makes is absolutely to be respected, and there's no wrong answer as far as a parent is concerned in some ways. But this is not how it should have been done.
No, I was watching on my social media feeds a clip from the CTV show The Social, and the ladies that were on there were talking about the opening of the school year. And I stopped to listen, and near the very end, there was a very enlightening response by, I wish I could remember who, and I apologize. If they happen to be listening, I'm very sorry I don't remember who said this. But there's just that there will be a reckoning at the end of this. And that's what I think every parent is aware of. Depending on how this goes, a reckoning will be happening, and come voting season, this is gonna be in the forefront of every parent's mind, is what could have been done better, and why wasn't it done better. I can say as a parent, the nervousness that we are feeling is unbelievable. This is not the start of a regular school year. I wish to God it was, but it is not. There's nerves, there's fear amongst, whether you're in the Catholic or the public board or the French Catholic board. There's fear amongst every parent. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Nobody has the confidence that this is going to work out well. We are hoping it will. We're praying that it will, but we just don't know. And I think,
I think yeah. I mean, and I think that's a horrible situation to be in. And I know it's absolutely shared with I would say the vast majority of teachers, that they are doing what they're told, and they're very unhappy about it. And there's going to be stress. There's going to be people who are off work because they are literally feeling in a terrible situation. They're being, in the midst of this, we've got new curriculum. There's like a new math curriculum. Teachers being asked to take on entirely new classes because of the major disruption that's happening with students going to the online option. And you know, it's an awful lot to ask, even if this was being done a lot more efficiently than it is.
I'm just going to leave off with one word of advice to any parent who might be listening, is that as we go into this, we're all in this together. I'm going to say, trust in your school, trust in the administration, trust in your teachers, trust in your fellow parents. Help each other out as best you can, because that's the only way we're going to get through this, is if we all have each other's back and we support where we can. Don't worry about blaming each other for perceived missteps. Help each other out. We're going to trip and fall over each other as this school year opens up, and we just need to be there for everyone. Help each other out as best we can, because I believe that's the only way we're going to get through this, is by helping each other as best we can. The time for accountability will come. It will be down the road. There will be a reckoning at election season. Hopefully this works out. If it does not, remember what you had to go through, and we'll hold our leaders, our boards, and our provincial members of parliament to account.
Nicely put. So, I mean, there's a couple of other things we will just quickly mention. I think in the weeks ahead, we're going to be dealing with some, more to do with issues of voting reform and citizen engagement, which those things are coming up in Burlington, but issues that are important right across the 905. In terms of news this week, I just want to mention very quickly a story I think it's on the front page of the Spec at the moment, which was a councillor in Hamilton being accused of bullying a retailer and then being caught being recorded by a CHCH journalist using some colourful language to tell a journalist not to publish the story, or this will not end well, I think was the words he used. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of it. I'm not even going to get into the details of which councillor it was. I'm mentioning it more because this is a pattern in Hamilton at the moment, that is not a happy place on Hamilton Council. There are some people there. Councillor, I need to look his name up. Give me a few seconds while I look this up, Joel. But the councillor in question is retiring before 2022. So to an extent, this is a problem that will solve itself. But people of Hamilton shouldn't have to deal with this until 2022. Forget who it is. It just, if you want to run for public office, do so for the right reasons. I go in with an agenda. You want to invoke change. You want to make your city, your riding, whatever, a better place. Go in with an agenda. Don't go in because you think you're God's gift to Hamilton or God's gift to Burlington or whomever. Go in with an agenda. Make a plan. I want to do X, Y, and Z. Do it or don't do it. Then get out. Too often people just go in for the self delusion that they are so important that Hamilton somehow, or Burlington or Oakville or whomever, somehow they cannot get along without them sitting at the table, and it's just hogwash. And it's that phrase that politicians often use but don't actually often mean, which is we're public servants. That means you're not the boss, we're the boss. You work for us. The respect should flow from the elected person to the voter and the taxpayer and taxpayer is a stupid phrase because we all pay tax. We're all paying HST if nothing else. Yeah. That arrogance that we've seen at council in Hamilton, we used to see it. We see it a lot less often now in Burlington, but we certainly are seeing it currently in Hamilton, of people who dare to challenge the prevalent view on council being treated with contempt. It's not acceptable. This is not how politics should work in this day and age. If you have a councillor who's habitually rude or arrogant, vote them the hell out.
Absolutely. End of story.
I think that will take us far enough this week after our weekly rant about people being horrible. And we'll be certainly exploring some of these issues in a lot more detail in weeks to come. But respect the voters. I know it begins the next, ends with that. Know your place if you're elected. Thanks everybody for listening this week, and we'll be back here again next week with another episode of the 905er, and I'll let you take it out, Joel, with the usual social media stuff.
No problem. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Look for us at 905er.ca. As well, if you have any comments, suggestions, tips for future shows, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at info@905er.ca. Thank you very much, folks, and we'll see you next week.
To make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.